I'm happiest in the saddle.
A fellow sportsman.
I am an FBI agent!
Great Scott!
What do you say we cut the chit-chat? A-hole!
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria!
Come with me if you want to live.
Hello, and welcome to Retro Ramble. I'm Charlie McGee.
I'm George McGee.
Yes. And let the impressions commence. We are covering Goldfinger, featuring Sean Connery, Honor Blackman.
Gert Frobe.
Who else is in this?
You have Bernard Lee as M. You have Lois Maxwell as Miss Moneypenny,
and Desmond Llewellyn as Q. So where do we? Well, let's explain. Why are we doing this, George?
Well, you were saying to me off camera, when we're going to do another Bond film, we should do something for the, have we got any bank holidays coming up? And I was like, well, there's August. And we talked about what Bonds we could do, because so far we have stuck within the Retro Ramble timeline, so to speak. The last ones we did 1983, Octopussy versus Never Say Never Again. We've done GoldenEye. We've done A View to a Kill. But yes, we decided as it's 60 years of Goldfinger, 60 years this year, I think this September, we decided to do Bank Holiday Bond, and we would jump back outside of the timeline. We would go probably the earliest we've ever done, and we would go back to 1964 to do Goldfinger, which is, as we've talked about on Patreon, we did some Bond specials, some rankings. It's probably my favorite Bond film, though I know a lot of people, Casino Royale probably pips it to the post, but for me, it has all the ingredients of a Bond film. It set the formula, but we'll get into that.
It is the Mission Impossible 3 of its time. Right, well, if you've listened to Retro Ramble before, you know what to expect. But if you haven't, here's a quick reminder from George.
Retro Ramble is an independent film podcast. Charlie and I are brothers. The purpose of this podcast is Charlie and I going back and reviewing the films of our youth, the films we grew up with, seeing what made them so great at the time. Do they still hold up? Have they been remade, spun off, turned into a Netflix series? And how did these films get made? So a little bit of trivia, behind the scenes knowledge. But it's a light-hearted look at these films, and we ultimately aim to entertain. But there are some warnings. There'll be some childish impressions and maybe some fruity language. So be careful if you have children around.
Small voices, tiny minds. Okay, great. Well, without further ado, let's get into the episode. So it is the third James Bond film. It is Goldfinger. And we're going to be covering it. George, have you got the trailer ready?
I do. It's 3 minutes and 9 seconds.
This may be edited down.
Yeah, but the easiest way to pronounce Goldfinger in the style of Sean Connery is if you drop the L and the D, so it's just Goldfinger.
Okay, that's good.
Gunning for trouble. 007. It spells Bond.
Shocking.
He's the idol of every woman.
Who are you?
Bond. James Bond.
The envy of every man. The nemesis of the treacherous Mr. Goldfinger.
Who are you?
My name is Pussy Galore.
Isn't it customary to grant a condemned man his last request?
You've asked for this.
Come and purr over Honor Blackman as Pussy Galore. The female who is all feline. Also starring Gert Frobe as Goldfinger. International cheat. International menace.
Gentlemen!
Goldfinger, the man with a finger in every pie. His goal, Fort Knox, the world's biggest bank. His enemy, 007, the world's wiliest, toughest gentleman agent with a license to kill. 007, it spells Bond. James Bond, mixing business with girls and thrills. Girls and fun. Girls and danger. The hotter the danger, the cooler he takes it.
I think you've made your point, Goldfinger. Thank you for the demonstration.
Choose your next witticism carefully, Mr. Bond. It may be your last.
Do you expect me to talk?
No, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die.
The whole film condensed into 3 minutes.
I was just getting into that.
It's Bond. It's Bond and the girls. Bond and danger.
Girls in danger.
Girls in danger.
And Bond and guys.
Bond playing with guys. So yes, we might cut that down, but
we may have to. I think we may lose some listeners. So George, it's been 60 years. What the hell? Let's cover it. But this was a VHS that was on heavy rotation in the McGee household growing up. Dad was a fan of the films, obviously. Mum was even a fan of the books. James Bond was the, if you like, could we arguably say the first franchise?
I think so, and obviously it's still standing. It's the longest running franchise.
Are they going to make another one?
Well, that's it. That's it. Yeah, I mean, I think it's still the longest running franchise. Because I think for a time the Carry On movies were giving it a good run, but the Carry On movies I think petered out in the 90s. I want to say,
thank God.
Thank God. So yes, this is Bond film number 3. But yes, I mean, I can't remember in terms of first memories. They all kind of merge into one. I remember my first Bond film. Everyone remembers their firsts, and it was the first one we covered, A View to a Kill. I remember rushing back because I think that was the premiere, and there was a lot of buzz. The ITV premiere, rushing back from watching it after school the next day because I think it'd been on too late for me to watch the evening before. But I think with the Connery ones, I think we've talked about this before. You watch them in sort of, there's another guy that plays James Bond, and they're older ones, but they all kind of merge into one from either bank holiday ITV schedules or whatever's in the video cupboard.
Yeah, I just think it's funny going back once you have that initial, well, especially because of the media. By media I mean like the fact it was on VHS. And then it was like, you can get with DVD, it was like, you can have all of them if you're willing to cough up the cash. And then you start looking at it differently. You start looking at the franchise, and that's when you start thinking, okay, what are my top 5 films? And I think we did cover this on a Patreon episode, so I'm probably going to correct myself.
We're not talking about your 5 DVDs again, are we?
No, not my 5 DVDs. Did we rank top Bonds? In our 60 years of...
We did. That was the first episode. I think we did Bond actors, and then we did top Bonds.
I have a feeling that I'd probably put this at a different ranking. But yeah, I mean, this is where they got, as you said, this is where they got the formula right. And it's definitely, for me, it's the best Connery outing, I think. In terms of if you look at on paper, his comfortability with the role, he didn't hate it. And
he wasn't bored.
Yeah. And also, I think the appetite for Bond was out there. They were firing on all cylinders. So, but what's weird is that because this is such a one of my favorites, and because you therefore watch it more than the others, sometimes when I go back and maybe not Dr. No, because I feel that's very slow in bits, but going back and watching From Russia with Love or For Your Eyes Only, which is just very silly, you're just like, and same with Diamonds Are Forever, because you don't watch them as much. They kind of, do you know what I mean? I feel like I've watched this a lot.
Yeah, I feel like I rediscovered it. I think ITV went through like a phase of playing them all every week in the mid to late 90s, I think, because I remember I recorded pretty much them all on videotape because all the missing ones that we didn't have. Because as you say, you probably have like half of The Spy Who Loved Me or was taped over with
Yeah.
something else, and you wouldn't have all of them. You'd have maybe a couple of them recorded off TV, and then you would just catch them. But yeah, I think went through a phase of watching them all, and obviously the 90s was a big time for sort of Bond mania picking up again. As we covered with Brosnan, with Goldeneye was a bit of a resurgence, a soft reboot of sorts, a bit of a, oh yeah, do you remember this? Because the Brosnan ones themselves were a bit of a celebration of all things Bond. So yeah, I think I did the same, like as you were saying, like, oh yeah, Doctor No is a little bit slow. And I know,
Thunderball is very slow in parts.
oh Christ, yeah, I'm jumping ahead here, but after watching Goldfinger for this episode, I was like bored the other night. I was like, oh well, I'll stick on Thunderball and move on to the next one. I was like, God, this film's. I was like, how long have we been watching it for? Must have been an hour. It's been 32 minutes.
Yeah.
That's such a slow-paced film. But anyway, a lot of people will probably argue that From Russia with Love is Connery's finest outing, and that whilst there's a lot to like in that film, I feel the pacing's a little bit off. Feel it's a bit anticlimactic. Like it's, after the train fight, it kind of dips.
For me, that's very much a film of its time.
Yeah,
It's very much like the other films of its time. Whereas this is going back to, this is the Bond formula. This one.
As I say, with this, it did establish which for a long time became the formula of, in terms of, this is the gadgets, the car, the villain, the lair, the henchman, the armies at the end. This is the first time you get a proper cold open or pre-title sequence. So again, they have that in From Russia with Love, but it's connected to the main story. This is the first time it's a standalone mini story at the start of the film. But have we covered everything for First Man? Shall I jump back to how did this get made?
Yes, please do. How do we get this film?
Quick history for those that don't know. So the Bond films were, in the main part, were made by two producers, an American and a Canadian, Harry Saltzman and Cubby Broccoli. And the first one was Dr. No, and that was written by Richard Maibaum and directed by Terence Young. That was a modest hit. So From Russia with Love was next. Again, they kept Terence Young as director, Richard Maibaum as writer. And they already started planning a third film. And Richard Maibaum started working on adapting on Her Majesty's Secret Service. Because at the time, I think that was in the charts. The book was in the charts. Right. So they were like, oh, well, this is the most popular. Let's, it's in the consciousness. Let's do that one. However, because they were making the films then, it was pretty much like one film a year.
Yeah.
There just wasn't enough time with On Her Majesty's, a lot of it set in the snow. And in terms of hitting that September 1964 release date, which they'd set for the third film, they're like, we're not going to be able to get these snow scenes in the bag.
Yeah.
So the next novel they planned to adapt for the third film was Thunderball. But as we tackled on our Never Say Never Again episode, Thunderball was going through some legal issues with the origins of the story, with a producer called Kevin McClory, who developed the script for Thunderball before he met Cubby Broccoli and Saltzman. And so that was still in the High Court. So whilst that was all being dealt with, they said, okay, well, let's turn to Goldfinger, because I think it was quite a popular novel. But another reason why they chose Goldfinger is because a lot of it was set in America, and they were keen to properly break America with Bonds. So I think the first two Bonds had been big successes in Europe, and they'd been modest successes in the US. Yeah. And with this one, they were like, because obviously, they were both North American producers, they were like, we've really got to break it with this one. How do we do it? And they brought in some more marketing people and saying, right, how do we make this more appealing to an American audience? And I think even in the original script, they had to sort of tone it down. And I think Connery said, oh, it feels a bit Americanized. So I think there was a bit of a push and a pull, but ultimately, yes, this was the film that turned Bond into a proper box office phenomenon. And Thunderball would go even higher. And I think adjusted for inflation, Thunderball is still one of the highest grossing films ever. But yes, this was the film that set the template. But just going back to so they kept Richard Maybaum as the main writer. There was a few other people that came in and sort of did edits. Terence Young officially chose not to return because he wanted to move on to other things. But then it emerged in an interview a little bit later that it was over money. He wanted some profit percentages, and he was denied that by the guys from Eon, from Broccoli and Saltzman. As we've covered elsewhere, and it's quite well known, they were very shrewd producers, and that was one of the reasons why Connery fell out with them. He felt, as he was the face of James Bond and doing all the physical stunts and everything, and having all the stress of being Bond, he wasn't really paid enough for it. And I think actually, I was reading, there's a great book that you and I have talked about in the past. If you're a fan of Bond, it's called Some Kind of Hero. And they talked about the money that Connery was making on this. And I think he made $50,000 for Goldfinger. And he was doing a Hitchcock film at the same time called Marnie, where he got 200 grand. So it's just ridiculous. But I think he did, in the end, he ended up getting some sort of profit percentage off the back of it. So I think he even said, oh, I can safely retire with these 3 films.
Yeah. But yeah, because I mean, I can't recommend that book enough. It's almost like I think what's funny about that book, Some Kind of Hero, is that it goes into so much detail in all of the films.
Yeah.
But it establishes so much about who does what for lighting and how they made the sets and the music and the stunts and the costume and the actors and everything. That by the time you've done the first 10 or 15 films, it's becoming, and even the book's aware of it. And I find myself getting less and less interested. But you're really interested in the beginning because they're doing so much of it for like the first 10 films. It's fascinating. And like when they have to change Bond, and it's like, we want to do this differently. It's a brilliant book.
I suppose, yeah, if anything, it shows like how much of a well-oiled machine it was. And whilst they were quite shrewd producers, everyone says that, Cubby Broccoli treated, the film crew like family. He would cook pasta for them. And that's why the same crew returned, obviously. And it was a steady, I say in the early days, as they were practically making them one a year. Not like nowadays where we have to wait about 7 or 8 years for a Daniel Craig dour fest. But yes, it is. If you're a fan of Bond, definitely check out the book. As Charlie says, they go into a lot of detail.
Okay, so they are 2 films in. This is the 3rd one. They're trying to conquer the US. So they set it in the US. It's funny how you're saying tone it down, because it's like there seems to be more skin. There's more skin in the game. We're introduced.
Well, I say just in terms of, I think the dialogue felt very Americanized, whereas I think Connery's like, oh, we need to bring it back a bit. And obviously there's a lot of American characters, which will go, hey, what are you talking about, Goldfinger?
We'll get to the wise guys.
We'll get to the wacky wise guys.
So we've got Gert Frobe. So everything's kind of introduced. It is like Miami, and then it's like Bond in a, what is it? Terry towel.
Oh, the terry toweling romper suit.
Yeah.
Where can I get me one of those? They have started remaking them, and like everything on the James Bond store, the 007 store, I think it's like you can get it, but it's like £400 to get like the authentic made one. But it's like
£400 just to get arrested.
I might just go on Temu or AliExpress and just get myself a Chinese knockoff of a terry toweling romper suit.
It's amazing, yeah, but
but Charlie, call me suspicious, but I get the sneaking suspicion that Sean Connery never went to Miami. I don't know what it is.
And what is it? Is it about the aerial helicopter shots?
It might be the back projection whenever Connery's on screen. I think I read out of everyone that's in that first bit in Miami, the only person that went to Miami is the guy that plays Felix Leiter. I think everything
Yeah.
else was establishing shots and then we'll film it on Pinewood. It's fine. We'll blend the two together.
It's funny the little things you notice later on in the film that Leiter is outside a Kentucky Fried a KFC.
Well, again, that goes back to the Americanography of it. And
Yeah.
in terms of Guy Hamilton, say, I think KFC wasn't a huge thing at the time, but he's like, oh yeah, I want to get him outside this fast food restaurant.
Because it's a local, it probably was a
Yeah,
local big thing it was probably a US thing,
yeah.
a US chain.
Oh, it definitely wasn't a global thing by then. But yes, I think that's it. It was very much the capturing that Americana type thing.
And some of our favorite lines of dialogue ever to be in a film, which is say goodbye, Dink.
Oh, man talk.
As he slaps her on the ass. I tried to explain that to Louise. I was like, "Is a different time, darling."
Well, I think that's it. This is probably one of the most misogynist Bonds, but it was a product of its time. But yes, we have to jump back to the first bit, Charlie, of the pre-titles sequence. Obviously, how iconic that is. After you get past the silly duck on the head, the wetsuit over the tux obviously has been parried numerous times. Obviously, probably most famously in True Lies. Again, you see so many stuff that Austin Powers has picked up on, like using the woman as a shield.
Yeah. I never got over that since a small boy watching this film. I say, can you really see the reflection of so? No, you can't. You can't. You can't. If you look at somebody's eyes, like you wouldn't get. You can't see that much detail.
I don't know. Maybe we should use one of our wives and just act out the scene and use the wife as a human shield.
Yeah, it's okay, darling. Just go with it.
Just go with it.
Yeah. So there's that. There's the let's electrocute him in the bath. And the timing, because you got the watch and you got him setting his charges, and then he's got the perfect alibi.
Yeah.
He's like seen. So yeah, I love that as a cold open.
I mean, it's great. I say it's sort of that balancing act of, yes, it's ridiculous. It's a bit, and again, from Russia with Love, I think that's something that Guy Hamilton, the director's brought into it, that he wants to have a bit of fun and he realizes it's a bit ridiculous. So the duck thing on the head, and apparently they looked at like he was going to have a dead dog apparently on his head, which just seems a bit bizarre. Whereas at least the duck is fun.
And he's even got a corsage for his tuxedo.
He's got his carnation, and the bit where he's like pumping out the plastic explosive with dirty hands, and the next scene perfectly clean. It's a bit of a Frank Drebin.
Yeah.
But yes, it is ridiculous, but it leans into it, and it's just so effortlessly cool. And I think that's it for me. This film is amazing. John Barry soundtrack. It's really like brassy and brisk. And I think, yes, this film does, in terms of pacing, it does have the odd pacing issue, but I think it is a really, again, it's setting that template. It feels like it's a real fun sort of caper.
Yeah, and I do think it stands. I think a lot of future Bonds would try to emulate this. They were like, well, Goldfinger had fun, and that scene is a really cool film. And I think obviously, we mentioned Brosnan before. Brosnan works so well because they had more films to look back on. They had Lazenby, they had Moore, they had Connery, and they were like, okay, let's celebrate Bond, and let's do it in a modern way. Whereas you kind of got the feeling with Moore, they were like, well, Sean Connery had fun. He made jokes. And it was like, well, the film made jokes, but he didn't make jokes. And so they feel like they were still finding their way until they got to, say, later in the franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it is kind of adapting to the times, and it's also maybe it's like a business decision of like, okay, how do we make these like more appealable to more audiences? Like, okay, ramp it up, make it a bit, larger than life, put in more comedy.
Yeah. This is a date movie. We need to make people laugh. And then they obviously picked the time, like when we need a new Bond, so they were keeping the finger on the pulse. They didn't want to let it go stale. Okay, so that's everything in terms of how we got this film and where the franchise was.
Well,
Uh,
one thing I haven't talked about is we can touch on Gert Frobe as Goldfinger. So a little bit of an anecdote. I actually went and saw they were doing a Bond season when I lived in London about 10, 15 years ago. And it was all, I think it was just the Connery ones they were doing at the BFI. And so I picked to go and see Goldfinger. And just as we were about to go in, we were told, "Oh, stick around at the end because there's a Q&A with Guy Hamilton." It was like, "What?" Yeah, my first question was, "He's still alive?"
yeah.
And yeah, he gave some great sort of anecdotes, and he was talking about the casting of Gert Frobe, and apparently he'd been this amazing like villain in a German film called The Pledge. And when they asked, they said, "Oh, well, they asked his agent. We've heard this story elsewhere. It's like, can he speak English? Of course he can. Of course he can." And so he turns up first day on set, and Guy Hamilton goes up to him and goes, "Oh, hello, Gert. How are you doing? Oh, nice to meet you. I'm very good. Thank you, thank you." And then he goes up to him a few hours later. He's like, "Right, so good. Have you had any lunch yet?" "Nice to meet you. Yes, I am good, very good." And he's just like, "What are we gonna do?" And he was trying. They basically got him to say because his English was so bad. They got him to say his lines phonetically, but it was still really slow. So Guy Hamilton was like, "Just say it really quickly and we'll sort it out in the dubbing." And in the rushes, like the producers are like, "What the hell is this?" He's like, "Don't worry, I'll fix it." And it's amazing. It is an amazing dub. So they got a TV actor called Michael Collins to do the dub. And I think he also dubs Gert Frobe for Chitty
Chitty
Chitty Bang.
Chitty Death Bang.
Chitty Chitty Death Bang as well. But yes, it amazingly it works. And I think for years you and I were like convinced that's him. And I think probably a lot of people still do.
But also, we weren't too far away from a time where there was dubbing in films for or ADR
Yeah.
for no good reason, and it was like because it was a bit of the industry, and there was like, well, we had. I think they obviously because there was a lot of ADR in even future Bonds after this one. ADR had not been and gone. It was still being used from
Yeah,
time to time.
yeah, it was something we might have covered in our Patreon specials. But yeah, I think in the early Bond films, most of the Bond leading ladies were overdubbed. In Thunderball, Domino is dubbed by the same like lady that dubbed Ursula Andress. That's not Ursula Andress. So yeah, there's a lot of dubbing that goes on in Bond films, but
So that's
this
probably my point is that's probably why we didn't notice the whole Gert Frobe thing. And no, Mr. Bond, I expect you to die has been lives on in our head in infamy, even if it's just from that CD of Moby's remix of
yes of the James Bond 97.
yeah.
So yeah, that's it in terms of the overview. But I'd say this established so much of the Bond formula. So this is the first time we get the first appearance of Q Branch. So whilst Q, as in Desmond Llewellyn, was introduced in From Russia with Love in the previous film, I don't know if he was even called Q. I think he was like the quartermaster.
Yeah.
And he just comes to M's office with the attaché case. But
Yeah.
this is the first, so it's the first appearance of the pre-credit sequence, the first appearance of Q Branch. And in this one, again, it's Hamilton want to have fun. He was the one that suggested that Q should hate Bond because he ruins all his gadgets and he never brings anything back intact. And he's like, yeah, as soon as Bond comes in, you're in a bad mood with him because he's just going to ruin everything. And again, that's something that is established for the rest of the series.
And he would go on to appear in probably more Bond films than any other actor.
I want to say he was in 19. I think he's right up until The World Is Not Enough.
Yeah. Always have an escape plan is his last line.
And what was it I was going to say? And obviously the car, the DB5, it's one of the most famous cars, movie cars of all time. It's a beautiful car. It's synonymous with Bond. They've retconned it into Daniel Craig's films now, and it
Yeah,
pops up. I don't think Roger ever drove it because there was the whole Lotus thing.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, Brosnan they brought it back for Goldeneye. And yes, they made a big thing of it with Daniel Craig as well, even though it makes no sense.
He won it
He won
in
it.
Casino Royale, and then he had the machine guns added later. I
Yeah,
think that's the story
that's the story
because reasons.
because of reasons.
Okay, so what do you want to talk about next? You want to talk about the cast? I mean, we know who's playing Bond. You talked about Frober. Honor Blackman. I don't feel like,
The lovely Hannah Blackman.
yeah.
So yeah, she was hot off she'd been in the Avengers, not those Avengers, the other ones. And I think because her character in the Avengers was a judo expert, they were like, oh, well, we can make Pussy Galore a judo expert. And so I think, yeah, she was quite a well-known actress. I think she was also one of the older Bond girls. I think she was in her late 30s, dare I say,
Oh my God.
when this was made. But yeah, I mean, Honor Blackman's gorgeous, lovely voice, and she's brilliant in this. Again, we get it. It's a little bit rapey, a little bit questionable sexual politics. The fact that Bond turns her. I mean, they don't really make it overly in the book. It's more overly stated that she's a lesbian, whereas in this, she's like, I'm immune to your charms.
Yeah, and also, yeah, rather than like he turns her, he just kind of violates her in a date rapey kind of
Just pins her down in the hay.
rapey way. But other than that, there's nothing wrong with it. They've got good chemistry though.
They have got very, and she even says, I think it was in like the behind the scenes stuff. She's like, oh, it was very easy spending hours in the hay with Sean Connery. He's got an amazing charisma, amazing sexual magnetism. She's like, but I was married at the time, so I couldn't do anything.
Yeah, she's just lovely, lovely. And I don't know, Bernard Manning, who just still to this day reminds me of our dad.
Bernard Lee, not Bernard Manning.
Sorry, Bernard Lee. Bernard Manning. No, Bernard Lee. Yeah, it just reminds me of just the way he's like so annoyed with him. 007.
Well, yeah. I think this is the first sort of instance of James Bond being a bit of a know-it-all dickhead as well with the with the brandy and,
oh God, yeah,
and skin asphyxiation, sir. Knows everything. And obviously Roger would take it to oh yes, Scaramanga, the man with the golden gun.
Fabergé eggs.
Fabergé egg, of course.
LOX, liquid oxygen. I think it's used for rocket fuel, sir.
Yeah.
Shut up, Bond.
So yeah, I have to point out as a callback to the chat we mentioned about John Ashton from Beverly Hills Cop looking old in the 80s. The old guy from the Treasury, so the scene where there's Bond and M with the brandy talking about gold and how to, ensnare Goldfinger. He was 39 years old when that was filmed, and that man clearly looks in his 60s.
Yeah, very much so.
But yes, I thought that was quite amusing, and it made me feel quite good about my age.
Yeah, and also I just love the banter between M and Bond. It works well.
Yes,
it fleshes out his character.
Again, it's part of the formula. You've got to have that banter, that push and that pull, that frostiness between the two of them. I think in the novel, I think it's still Goldfinger is working for Spectre, but in this they just make it he's working for the Chinese. Oh, Mr. Ling.
Yeah.
Also, yes, Burt Kwok himself, who would go on to be Kato in the Pink Panther films, but he would also appear in I think at least one more Bond film. So he's in You Only Live Twice as the guy that's relaying all the orders in Blofeld's lair, closing shutters.
Yeah, I just need the work, and I love working with you guys at Pinewood.
So yes, that explains why Goldfinger has a genuine army. He's got all his Chinese goons all over his base. And that's a great scene with the DB5. I mean, I say it's a beautiful car. You've got the beautiful scenery in Switzerland, but then you've got the whole sequence with him, showing off what the car can do, all the gadgets and stuff. And apparently that's all just filmed around the warehouses of Pinewood. So there's
Yeah, I
now,
think looking back now, you can kind of get that vibe.
yeah, because I think there's Goldfinger Avenue, I think at Pinewood, which is one of the main streets they filmed on. The one of the things, the jokes I always forget about but love is the granny with a machine gun, the
Yeah,
gatehouse granny.
because she curtsies and everything. She's like, oh, she's a lovely dad. And then
Sweet old lady.
and then she pops out with an MP44.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that's a great scene. It's a shame that the car gets totaled, but obviously it will return in several other Bond films, as
Yeah.
as we joked about. It's had more appearances than Timothy Dalton. But yeah, what else do you want to talk about? I suppose we are whisked away to America, Charlie. Well, there's lots of
Kentucky.
people with American accents.
What's going on here? See, we get introduced to the mob.
The lots of the mob from all over the US. And hey, what's going on? Why are you closing the curtains over there? What's going on?
Just some kind of merry-go-round.
And again, apologies, we keep using the formula bingo card, but the overly elaborate map room and control room of
when did you get this made? How
much did this all cost just for your PowerPoint presentation?
I mean, essentially, the way that the whole thing rotates and everything's like drawn to scale. I think Doc Emmett Brown would have something to say. It's like, sorry, this is all I had time to do.
Exactly. It's just the way that like the pool table splits in half and spins round, and it's just like, yeah, gentlemen, as you will see, and it's just like, surely a photo would have been fine and a map would have been fine.
Not as impressive, not as bombastic, not as Bond-tastic.
Indeed. But yes, those gangsters and the ADR, because all the sort of like say some more stuff, say some why are the windows closing? Well, what's happening with the floor?
Yeah, and I'm a bit confused because obviously you've got the plot is very straightforward. It's like we're going to gas everybody, and then we're going to nuclear, like make the gold unusable due to the half-life of the nuclear effect. And I'm sure it'd be a lot longer than that. But anyway, there's a bit that I got confused in watching it this time around where Bond's like, yes, because he knows everything. He's like, yeah, but Goldfinger, the gas is fatal. But so what gas is used in the film? What gas does he use on the gangsters? And the gases is obviously switched
Yes.
at the end.
Yeah, so Pussy swaps out the gas, but she doesn't say what
sides.
So she turns Danger's allegiances.
Yeah.
So yeah, she swaps out, but it doesn't say what she swaps out for, or whether because obviously they're pressing something. And then because that's again, like I remember watching that in the cinema, and that part with all the soldiers just like
it's very well done.
No, but it's so camp as well. Like, oh.
Yeah, everyone's like,
oh. But yes, that's actually one of the key changes from the book. In the book, Goldfinger does actually plan to steal the gold from Fort Knox, and that's why Connery, Bond being a smartass, calls it out, saying, "Oh, it would take." 12 days to get all the gold out.
Just does all the numbers.
Yeah, I've just been doing some quick maths in my cell.
Yeah.
And yeah, they obviously solved that by it's the 60s. Let's throw in a nuclear warhead for reasons, and a dirty bomb.
Yeah.
But yes, it's a great point, and we must shout out in terms of Ken Adam. So Ken Adam was one of the legendary Bond production designers, and designed all the sets. Obviously, one of the most famous being the hollowed out volcano. But in this, they weren't allowed access to Fort Knox. They could film the outside of it, but they weren't given, understandably, they weren't given any sort of photos or plans. So they were just like, okay, go nuts. And creating that entire like cathedral of gold. It's an amazing set.
Yeah, and you do get some, maybe elements will be reused, as you say, for a hollowed out volcano. But we've gone so far since the days of Dr. No, where they
Yeah.
were like, it could be in a factory anywhere. But it's really impressive stuff. Everything is really well done, and I don't know, it's a great scene for a fight as well. The first sort of big.
Well, we haven't talked about random task. I mean, who throws a shoe? I mean, honestly.
Our job. Many people have tried to involve themselves in my affairs, unsuccessfully.
Odd Job, Harold Sakata, I think he's called, because he was in a Hawaiian bodybuilder, I think he was.
Oh wow, yeah, and
a
built like
weightlifter, I want to say.
yeah, super strong, built like a brick shit house. Do not mess.
But yeah, he's brilliant for, a man that's mute. And apparently, because he was new to acting, he got a little bit like rough in some of the fight scenes, and Connery had like an ongoing back injury. I think when he judo chops him at the start of the film and like knocks him out in the hotel room, I think he didn't realize, you're not supposed to go full contact. So yes, I think Connery had a recurring but yes, again, one of the first henchmen, obviously, we had the amazing Red Grant in From Russia with Love, but and he was a very smooth talker, so it's a very interesting dynamic to someone who can't say anything, but he's still very menacing. And it's a great fight where Connery's just trying to find anything he can just to batter him with, like using like throwing the gold at him and fence posts and stuff.
But he's no slouch, Connery. He's a big unit, so that's why I think it's a very impressive fight, and the way he uses his own weapon against him. So very, I think, satisfying. And you've got the countdown. You've got the the ninjas. You've got the army,
the army versus army.
Yeah, of course. That thing with Goldfinger switching sides just to get away always makes me laugh.
No, it's a great plan of like, I'll just disguise myself as a general with a gold-plated magnum.
Yeah, just to show who I am. So no, it gets so many things right. It was the success. It obviously this is where it was the last thing that was missing from James Bond was international global success, and to do that they had to do it in the US, and they did it, and the rest is history.
Yeah, I mean, I think this was the first film that really pushed on. There might have been a little bit From Russia with Love, but in terms of the merchandise and the marketing. So obviously there was the Corgi Aston Martin car that I think we had, that they were making since the 60s, and was the biggest selling toy of 1964. And I think Corgi have still got a partnership with Bond, with all the Bond cars. But yes, there was loads of tie-in from clothing, dress shoes, action figures, board games, jigsaw puzzles, lunchboxes, record albums, trading cards, and slot cars, whatever slot cars are. But yes, it was I think, again, just ramping everything up. And Bond Mania, I think, would probably hit that crescendo with sort of Thunderball. And I suppose You Only Live Twice, and Connery was just getting more and more fed up and disillusioned with the fame it attracted.
But definitely one of our favorites. Anything else you want to mention that we should say?
No, I think I've said formula enough.
I feel like we've given a lot of service already. We did obviously check out our episodes on Patreon, where we did celebrated 60 years of Bond a couple of years ago, in 22. So we did some specials on our top Bonds, top femme fatales, top villains.
Yeah, I think that goes without saying. We've obviously, there's a few Bond episodes on the main podcast, but if you are a big Bond fan and you want a Patreon subscriber, it is definitely worth checking out. There's Charlie and I are huge Bond fans, and by the time you're listening to this, there will be another Bond special popped up where we're going to be talking about the best Bond games, because we've played a lot of them, because we're big fans.
The good ones and the not so good ones.
And the not so good ones. I say this for me is, I say it's quintessential Bond. I just love the 60s-ness of it all. I mean, I think Connery looks amazing, in the three-piece suit. The John Barry score, which I haven't talked about. There's parts of that score that is used for 90s trip hop act, the Sneaker Pips, Six Underground. That's using bits from the Goldfinger soundtrack. But yeah, it's a great score. It's a great villain. It's got everything.
Girls, action, danger.
Action, danger.
Guys.
Guys, dangerous guys. So yeah, I say for me, it's probably my favorite Bond film, and it's definitely Connery's best. I think he's definitely having, as you say, he's comfortable in the role, and they kind of say that with the other films, that by the third Bond film, everyone's hit their stride.
Everyone's really cranked.
But not poor Timothy Dalton or George Lazenby. I forgot.
No.
I do have a tiny coulda, woulda, shoulda.
Go for it. This will be interesting. It was George Lazenby. Your time, it's not now, George.
Oh, come on, mate.
Coulda, woulda, shoulda is where George tells me and the rest of us actors or directors who were considered for the role but didn't, for whatever reason, get their chance. So who was overlooked?
First, we'll cover returning characters. So in Felix Leiter, in Dr. No, was played by fairly well-known American actor Jack Lord. He was in Hawaii Five-0.
Yeah,
that
great
guy.
actor. Yeah,
great actor, great hair, and he was contacted to come back, obviously for continuity reasons, but he demanded too much money, and he also wanted co-star billing because he felt, I think he must have been doing Hawaii Five-0 at the time as well. He's like, well, I'm a big deal. I should be on the poster with Connery.
Yeah.
And they're like, we'll find someone a lot cheaper. Don't worry about it.
That's interesting.
Interesting, Jack. Yes. Get me Sec Linda on the phone. So yes, Sec Linda was cast after that, and then that kind of again set the sort of template of
we could switch it up every time.
Doesn't matter. We've got different Felix Leiters, but for Goldfinger, apparently Orson Welles was considered, but again his financial demands were too high. Okay. And in the special features, there's an actor I've never heard of, but you see him doing a screen test. An actor called Theodore Bickle auditioned for the role, but ultimately was not successful.
So that is a very short, but very relevant coulda, woulda, shoulda. Always good to know.
Well, I suppose you've had coulda, woulda, shouldas in terms of, I suppose it's an interesting question, and it is one of the big what ifs. If they had the timings were different, and we would have got a Connery-led On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I think that's something that most would have loved to have seen.
Yeah, very much so.
But do you need to build up Bond a bit more before you tackle On Her Majesty's, I suppose, is a point. But it's something that it's one of the great what ifs. I would have loved to have seen a Connery On Her Majesty's, even though I think Lazenby does get a bit of stick for it. I think he does the best he could.
It's a good film. It's a good film. It is. It's just.
But it would be amazing with Connery.
Exactly. You're just struggling. The whole thing in the kilt. It's a bit of a reach. So in terms of suspicious spin-offs, were there any other films in the franchise?
No, it was just a trilogy, 3 and out.
So James Bond will return on Retro Ramble. That's for sure.
I don't want to do Thunderball.
We're not doing Thunderball. We've done look at this way. We've done Never Say Never Again.
Some people see that as an inferior. No, we were talking about this. We probably are gonna, being Bond fans, we are gonna get through them, but we'll probably jump around a bit just so it's like not. We're not going to do it chronologically.
So Thunderball is the last one that we do after Die Another Day.
And Spectre. Ugh.
Spectres, yeah.
And the world is not enough. Put all the boring ones at the end.
Yeah.
But yes, James Bond will return on Retro Ramble, and he will return on Patreon as well. So, yes, I think I've said all I need to say on this film.
Wonderful. Okay. So yeah, stay tuned. Catch us on all of the channels. There's retroramble.blog, our blog, available online. You can get us on Facebook, you can get us on Instagram, and obviously check out our Patreon at patreon.com/retroramble if you need more recent content and more content in general. So until next time for this episode, I've been Charlie McGee.
I've been George McGee.
And we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Goldfinger, he's the man with the mind.